Hello all. A note on this episode before we begin. We recorded Robert McIntyre again, as promised, and as is tradition with this podcast, the audio was once again really fucked up. Stephen came through okay, but Rob's track is kinda crappy, and my audio was almost incomprehensible. We've done what we can to fix up Robert's audio, and I have re-recorded everything that I said just now in a microphone and added it to the interview in post. This means that my tone of voice might not quite match what was originally said, but all the words are the same. Also, I have a bit of a cold right now, so I don't sound that great either. Like I said, this is a very special episode. We've also put the listener feedback at the beginning of this because the audio for the listener feedback was actually okay. We apologize for how chopped this will all feel, and we hope that next time Robert's on the podcast, there will be some different technical issues rather than audio being bad and or lost.
And also, of course, big thanks to our sound engineer, Kyle Moore.
Here we go.
First, we would like to thank our Patreon supporter, Philip Reynolds. Is that Reynolds? No, that's Remond. I thought that was an R and an N, but it's just an M. We'd like to thank our Patreon supporter, Philip Remold, for helping support us and bring this to you. And you people make it worthwhile because, it's nice to know that people care. So thank you.
I second everything Enos just said. That's fantastic. We really appreciate it. Speaking of supporters, that brings up one thing I wanted to dive into. So this episode's going to be coming out on the 17th, which is... This episode's going to be coming out on the 14th. Is that right? 17th, yeah. So this is going to be a few weeks after, but there was some concern last month in December, which is now, when Patreon put out some new fees that were going to fall under the donors instead of the recipients. And their idea was, hey, look, the recipients will get more of your money, and we'll be getting a little more too. And that really upset a lot of people. And we had some people write in, specifically Roman and Nick wrote in to basically say, hey, look, sorry that, to withdraw our support, but we can't abide by Patreon doing this. Patreon sent out a letter last week saying that last week from now, a few weeks ago from the release, that they are withdrawing that idea because it turns out everybody hated it. So they're not going to be rolling out that fee adjustment, which is great. I appreciate everybody who, what am I trying to say? I am completely understanding the people who, don't want to be dropping extra money and for every Patreon that they're doing. So,
or even just the people who were against it just on principle,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's another big part. And so there were some people asking if we were going to be setting up a PayPal or something, which I was going to do. But I think that since Patreon is turning out to have changed their minds on this, that it's no longer worth it to set up a PayPal account for this right now. But that'll probably be coming down the pipe too, because why not? So,
can I just say that I was literally surprised. Like, I had to update my model of the world upon learning that Patreon was pulling back and decided not to do that anymore. Because, I've gotten so used to people just not giving a fuck,
Oh, you guys hate that? Well, tough shit.
Yeah. So when everyone started complaining and writing and tweeting, and I was like, well, no one fucking cares anyway. They're just going to do what they want to do. They have power and money, and we don't matter. And then, they changed their policy. And I was like, that is nuts. It just pushes me slightly more in the libertarian direction when, I see corporations actually listening to people and changing things. Because I'm like, no fucking way the government would pay attention to that kind of shit.
Right. Well, I think part of it is that Patreon has competitors, right? So, that is the one blessing of the free market. Well, I guess not the one, but it is a blessing of the free market in that, hey, we've got competition. We can't unilaterally be fucking our customers because they'll just go somewhere else. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. Speaking of being unilaterally fucked by big businesses, the FCC vote happened and didn't work out, or rather, worked out the way everyone thought it was going to, and net neutrality is revoked. I didn't do a lot more homework since you and I last talked about it, but I I was curious if if you're learning that the fact that like the EFF and the ACLU and everybody in organizations like that were worried about this vote, if that updated your model at all from what you read.
Well, a little bit in that I was significantly less confident in my position afterwards, but I went to the EFF AMA that you linked me, and I didn't see them actually say all that much of substance. The fact that they're against it, though, does speak a lot to me, because I trust that organization. I think they do good work. So I'm not as confident as I was before, but I still think that for the most part, this is a large overreaction, and I don't trust regulations necessarily to get things right. And I would much rather see a large competitive market of ISPs and providers rather than the government coming in and saying, hey, here's your cool monopoly, but you have to follow these rules. Because the rules...
Well, I think we'd all prefer that, but that's not really what's happening, right?
Well, it's not happening. First of all, wireless keeps getting better, and there's times where I go to my cell network instead of my internet when I want reliability, which is the exact opposite of how things were 5-10 years ago. So
Sure.
yeah, the cell networks keep getting better. There's in most of the populace has more than one option, and they are starting to have to change a little bit because of that. So I think that there is some competition, and that having less of the regulation would make it easier for small people to get in.
Right on. Well, I'm curious about that too. That reminds me, I wanted you to send me the stuff that you read, because we talked about it last time. You said you read some stuff that persuaded you that way, and I didn't get a chance to look at it yet, so I got to take a look.
Oh, did I not send you that?
I don't think so.
Okay, I'll send it to you after we get off the Skype here, and yes, and I'll send it to you, because I was going to link it all in our episode when it goes just before it goes up on Wednesday anyway.
Cool. That reminds me, I am only about a half hour into it, but I will be chugging away tonight and tomorrow. So, but let's see. As far as other feedback,
before we get to listener
yeah.
feedback, can we do host feedback?
Yeah, go nuts.
Okay, so I have some feedback from our last episode with Jenkins from myself, because there was a number of things that I kind of wanted to say, but we didn't have the time to say them, and quite honestly, I hadn't really got my head around how I wanted to say it at the moment. When the episode first started, I didn't realize that it was going to be spirituality via drugs, which I probably should have, given that we know Jenkins. And but the one thing, as I was editing the episode, that really stuck out to me as we were talking about this was he said a few times things along the lines of, and here's a direct quote, because I wrote it down, spirituality is not the goal of science. And then someone brought up, I don't remember if it was you or him, but brought up Richard Feynman as sort of the stereotype of the cold, unfeeling scientist. And I wanted to say that I think my spirituality is different, which is why I don't quite do the drugs connection with spirituality as much as other people seem to, because in my opinion, I mean, spirituality is not the goal of science maybe, but science is a big part of my spirituality. It is the wonder of exploring the world and seeing how it works and finding out all the little things that make us go, and how wondrous and amazing that is, and how we as humans can discover this stuff and not only use it to our advantage, but even like know it and understand it. Like, can a frog understand this sort of thing? Can the process of a river cutting its way through a continent understand these things? No, I mean, they're ruled by the physics, but the fact that we can comprehend them and look on the universe and be part of the universe is really very beautiful to me. And so my spirituality is very much science-based, which is, I think, part of the thing I was going for with saying that that when someone asked me, how could you look at something and think it makes itself, instead of attributing it to God, and my reaction was like, that is anti-spiritual. That is just childish. The comprehension of the physical
forces that made this is to me a much more spiritual thing. And I think Richard Feynman is actually a great example of that, because if you ever see him talking, oh my God, he's just got this joy for life and for his knowledge and his craft, and he loves explaining it and understanding things. And there's just this energy that exudes from him when he's talking, even about simple things like the physics of how a train car goes down the rails without, rolling off them. He's just so full of wonder and happiness, and that is the sort of thing that I feel when I look at the universe. And so someday I want to do a sort of spirituality, science with spirituality episode. Not anytime soon, because we've just done 2 in recent succession, but that is more where I get my wonder in the universe and my feeling of oneness with all things, rather than, I don't know, bullshit talking with other humans or.
So I think you and I totally agree, and I'm not sure how well that came out in the episode, but I'll trust your recollection of it over mine, since you did the editing on it. But yeah, if he brought up Feynman as an example of a cold, unfeeling scientist, well, that seems to not jive with anything that I remember from Feynman either.
Not necessarily as an example of it, but like as the stereotype that people would think of a scientist being cold and unfeeling type.
Oh, well, they chose a bad stereotype then.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I mean, to Jenkins's point, we haven't done the drugs that he's done. So maybe if we did enough of, DMT or something, or ate a bag of mushrooms, that we would totally change our minds and say, man, all that cool enlightenment and rush we got from comprehending our place in the cosmos, that's nothing compared to this trip. But I sort of doubt that, at least from, my pre-doing that experience. For sure, I think that Carl Sagan, that was like, we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. And there's the dull meaning of that, like, yeah, we're made of matter, we can look at matter and comprehend it. But the real rush and meaning to that is like, I guess just that sentence again, but with different emphasis, right? We are, yeah, I mean, we could go on and on about it, but yes, I totally agree. And I think that, that Jenkins and I and you were talking about different things. Maybe to Jenkins, they're inseparable, but yeah, to me, I think that, it's cool to have a trip on LSD and I feel like I had a valuable experience, and I don't regret doing it. And I even feel like I had some like interesting, realizations that my brain kind of awkwardly spent an afternoon trying to work on when I was tripping. But certainly I don't think that, at least for me and my experience, that there was anything that profound there. Nothing like, just reflecting on, your shared history, your shared ancestry, rather, with a houseplant, right? To think that it literally, if you lined up our parents going back in time, we'd have a same parent. That's insane. So that's pretty cool. Or at least we'd have a shared species of parent.
Okay, so I'm glad I got that out.
Thank you for doing that.
Okay, did you have any listener feedback, it sounded like?
Real quick, write-in here, or a comment on episode 30 of Specs and Omelets, which was our discussion of the minuscule Eudalon, or negative Eudalon distribution across an unimaginably large number of beings versus one being tortured. Their take was that they prefer the large number of beings suffering a small bearable thing over one unbearable thing, because you can bear unbearable things. And yeah, oh right, did I say it wrong? Yes, you can bear bearable things, but you can't bear unbearable things. And so yeah, that's true. But I think the purpose of the thought experiment was more to not so much to like weigh one ruined life over trillion very minutely or disturbed lives. It was to get you thinking about, if that is an actual, if say the dust speck was an actual negative Eudalon experience among that large of a group of beings, then how could you possibly weigh that against the maximum number of negative Eudalons from one being? I think that they sort of missed the point. Did that make any sense to you?
No, that makes total sense to me, and that it basically is what the argument boils down to. The one unbearable thing is unbearable versus the numbers are higher, and I don't. That's just there's I don't know if there's a way to resolve that. It's just a philosophical difference that some people do not care about the numbers and other people do.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm still sort of pretty undecided on it. Luckily, I'm not standing over a switch to make this decision. So,
well, I mean, it becomes more of a question of how do you program your God? And if your God thinks in numbers, that's an issue, right?
Luckily, I'm not programming God either. So,
right. Metastable, who says that I said in one of our earlier episodes that Elon was an early founder of Miri, but I think you got him confused with Peter Thiel. And yes, that is the case. I meant Peter Thiel, and I did at that point confuse him with Elon because, my brain's stupid, and they're both cool Silicon Valley guys that I look up to, so it made a little switch.
I'm sure it's good. It's worth pointing out that there's conversation happening over at the subreddit, r/the Bayesian conspiracy, if you like stuff to talk about between episodes here. Looks like on the drugs episode, Jenkins expanded his... or I guess added some notes to the conversation on the episode 49, the Spirituality Via Drugs episode. So if you're interested in seeing more of that from him, you're welcome to check that out there.
Yeah, to provide, a balancing view to what I had just said earlier. It is good for Jenkins to be able to say his piece as well. And that is on the subreddit, in the Spirituality Via Drugs episode, the first comment.
Oh, nice. I mentioned the baptizing the dead thing that the Mormons do. And we had somebody, Hanky USA or Honky USA, I'm not sure how they say it, but on that same episode, they have a lot to go on here, but they talked about some of the dead people that are baptized. And apparently Carl Sagan's on the list. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, we had a number of people write in, a number of ex-Mormons write in to tell us about Mormon afterlife. And for the most part, it sounds like basically everyone gets a heaven, or at least a sort of spirit prison where they're not actively tortured or anything. They just sort of hang out until they get some sort of saving things. Even like the worst people on Earth, like criminals and horrible people, get a type of afterlife that's not really a hell. They're just trapped in the company of other horrible people. Whereas, as opposed to being, actively tormented by God or anyone else, they just have to hang out with each other, which kind of suck. And like the normal people just get sort of, a nice place, but it isn't like heaven, and then like the really good people get ultimate awesome bliss heavens and get to become gods of their own universes if they were like really cool. The only real hell they have is this thing called the outer darkness, in capital letters, and that is where rebels against God go. So literally Satan, the other 1/3 of the angels that rebelled with Satan, and any people who were Mormons but then left Mormonism because they were in God's presence, but then they left. So they are, basically rebels against God, and they get to go to the actual hell that's awful, called the outer darkness.
And do they get saved? Because I'm pretty sure Carl Sagan was like an active campaigner against religion, and that sounds like an enemy of God.
I don't think he was a Mormon in life, and then
you don't.
The church.
Oh yeah, no, but you said that it was for rebels of God or ex-Mormons.
Well, rebels against God are literally people who were Satan or those angels, or people who were Mormons and left.
Okay, so that's the only three. It's not like, say, if you and I made it our life's goal to deconvert as many Mormons as possible, only the Mormons who got deconverted would go to hell, not us.
Right, exactly. Because they were actually in the presence of God and then rebelled, whereas we were never blessed enough to be in the presence of God, so we couldn't rebel against him.
Cool.
Which, I guess it sort of makes sense because it's not too tortury for everyone else, but it has very strong penalties for being an apostate, which most religions do. They generally hate people who were that religion and then left far more than anyone else. So, okay, there we go.
Perfect. I'm not seeing a whole lot of other feedback, but I thought we were behind on some stuff. Anything jumping out at you?
No, that is about it. And since we took some time with host feedback, I think this is a decent time to stop.
Works for me.
Hey folks, this is Kyle, audio editor for the Bayesian Conspiracy Podcast. Due to the aforementioned chopped-up nature of today's episode, we neglected to record an intro for our guest, so we now present to you our interview with Robert McIntyre, Please enjoy.
All right. Well, in that case, welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Steven Zuber.
I'm Minash Brodsky.
And I'm Robert McIntyre.
Robert, thanks for coming back on.
It's a real pleasure.
I don't know if Minash mentioned last time, something got garbled in the audio when we were, I guess, between saving the file, or recording and saving the file, and it came through kind of like if you're shouting through a wood chipper the whole time. So at the very least, I think it would be useful to cover some of the same stuff as last time. But before that, I wanted to hear about the talk that you gave at the
Future of Humanity Institute?
That's the one.
Well, that one. That was their Vision conference, I believe, a couple of weekends ago, and they invited a bunch of people over. The talk that I was part of was, kind of what the future of mind uploading was going to look like, and was able to discuss some interesting stuff.
What was your take on what the future is going to look like?
They were trying to compare it to Hanson's book, Age of EM, and I think one of the main things there is he thinks that AI is not going to really happen before we get the uploading. I don't see how you can't get some type of AI, especially if you have gotten to the point where you're beginning to really understand how the brain works. It seems to me like if you can upload a mouse, that gets you certainly some amazing tricks to do with our current neural networks, which may lead to something that's got some fairly robust intelligence. So that's the main conceit that he makes in that book, probably because he's wanting to explore, what would happen in the absence of AI, like many science fiction books do. And AI makes it very hard to predict, because then you're trying to look past kind of the singularity, right? But I do think that's somewhat unrealistic. So that was the main thing I had.
I agree. We talked with Robin about his book Age of M, actually. Well, it was, I think, just in general, but we talked about Age of M, and that seems to be one of the, I guess, priors to the book, that if AI happens, it's too slow of a takeoff for it to subvert the Age of M from happening for a couple of years. I think he's been a proponent of slow takeoff for as far back as I've been following his stuff.
Oh, speaking of AI takeoff, have you guys seen the new, what was it, not AlphaGo, but AlphaZero?
AlphaGo Zero, yeah, I read about that on a post by Yudkowsky responding to some letter of criticism.
Okay, yeah. It took it 4 hours to go from doesn't know the rules of the game to superhuman playing?
Well, not just superhuman, better than Stockfish, which was our best AI for playing chess. So not only did it go past all of the many hundreds of years of human experience, with masters teaching their students on how to play chess, but then it also ended up beating the best AIs we were able to build to play chess as well.
I thought it played Go.
That was for AlphaGo, but for AlphaZero, they used chess for it, and there was no outside influences at all on it. It was just given the rules of the game, and basically that's it. And with just that, it played against itself until it figured out chess and was able to break the game so that it would never lose.
It's pretty good.
It only took 4 hours. It's insane. And first of all, not only how many hundreds of years of humans working to perfect the game, but after that, decades of programmers making computer-playing chess programs, which were basically programmed with special knowledge, things like opening moves and gambits, and what to do when this situation arises, looking forward X number of moves in advance, and then all of those decades of work in programming was just blown away by a learning algorithm in 4 hours. It is, I think, as Eliezer said, a indication that his idea of fast AI takeoff is more likely, because once they figured out how to do the learning in a good learning algorithm, it just demolished all previous work.
So I'm not an AI programmer, but isn't it a different sort of problem? Because you can program in the rules of chess, now go forth and figure out how to kick ass at it. But can you program in the rules of the universe and say go in and figure out how to kick ass at that as easily? Not obviously as easily, but is that even the same kind of problem?
I don't know, but it's pretty impressive that you can blow past. We cared about chess a lot, and we spent hundreds of years trying to get good at it, and this thing just blew past it from nothing to better than everything in 4 hours. Is very impressive, I think.
Oh, I totally agree.
The main point being that it managed to self-improve over just 4 hours, starting from scratch, rather than incrementing further from previous efforts. The The whole slow AI takeoff argument depends on an AI slowly, incrementally learning at a rate where we can see what's going on and maybe react. Whereas this kind of shows that once an AI learns how to learn in the proper way, it can take off at an exponential rate far faster than we're able to understand what's happening. And in the process, just cruises right past everything that we had thought that we'd figured out over centuries and or decades.
So I get like these mixed feelings whenever I think about super AI like impending, and I think the same feelings everyone else gets. But it's hard for me to be stoked, but it's also super exciting, right?
Right, it's terrifying.
Yeah, although to be fair, chess is still a pretty circumscribed type of game, right? So just because it can blow it away that quickly, may or may not have a lot of bearing on what it can do in general. But still, I think there are a lot of other games that humans play that are very important economically. That you may very well see an AI go from totally not competitive in those fields to better than not only anything we could do, but anything we could work with a computer to do very rapidly, and that itself could be a big deal.
Yeah, well, Charles Strauss has explored this concept before in his books as well, but a lot of our financial instruments, financial markets can be gamified and viewed as a game, and AI bent on learning those could, in theory, come up with financial instruments that we cannot even really understand what it's doing and throw the entire economy into complete chaos.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, it could be nuts.
And yeah, chess is really a limited arena, but I think it's a proof of concept that if you get the learning algorithms right, they can really advance a lot faster than a lot of people have been thought plausible.
I think you're right. It's both exciting and daunting. We'll see how it goes. Fingers crossed. Hooray. So that's the thing. Do you think they're going to be, when they go to like hit enter on these machines and start things going, do you think they're going to be like popping champagne and be like, all right, guys, we're all excited? Or do you think they're going to be like just getting wasted and thinking, hopefully this doesn't kill everybody?
Well, I hope if that's their actual fear, then they wouldn't press the button in the first place.
Yeah, you're probably right. I guess, yeah.
Yeah, you gotta go for it. You gotta make that money, right?
Yeah, I think the button will be pressed by other people who are afraid that if they don't press it, other people will beat them to it. And it can't be that bad, right?
Well, that's almost worse than the two options I laid out.
Because your two options are like, either we get it right or,
Or we have no idea, not like we better hurry.
Right, because, what if the Chinese get it before we do? And then the Chinese would have this huge advantage and maybe take over the world, and we don't like that. We want hegemony.
Back in the day, we had a little bit more primitive morality, I think, where, the king is good because he's so powerful, right? And this concept of that you can be good and not powerful, and like just because you're powerful and can kill everyone doesn't necessarily mean that you're right or good or moral. I think that's a thing we had to figure out over time. That wasn't as obvious at the beginning. And I think a lot of the people, so the people I've talked to, that are actually working on AI still have this notion, where they think if the AI is better at playing some of these games, then it deserves to be able to take over everything. And there's this kind of fatalism that's part of that. So, anyways.
Yeah, not a fan of that thesis, I guess. Yeah, something that's just straight up. If might makes right. If it can kick my ass, it deserves to be the boss of me, right? Fuck that.
I think there's a bit of an is-ought distinction here, because something that can kick my ass will be the boss of me, but I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. So maybe if I can stop it from coming into existence, I would like to do that.
Agreed. Okay, well. Before I forget, I wanted to do a kind of quick recap of our last conversation. So talk about, I think, the small animal brain freezing award. I'm sure there's a better name for it. Preservation award. Sorry, I'm not running on all cylinders today. I should have mentioned that at the beginning of the call. So, but I'm definitely good enough to talk, just not lead.
So let's talk about the Small Mammal Brain Preservation Prize, and how this aldehyde-stabilized cryopreservation technique that I made managed to win that prize. The large mammal prize is still outstanding, but I've seen some of the early results for it, and they're looking fairly good. So I do hope that will be one. And then we went into more talking about, brain preservation, mind uploading, what that future sort of looks like, what you would probably want in a brain preservation technology now. We touched on some of Alcor's stuff, and that was most of the conversation. Some of the things I'm trying to do for Nectome, I guess.
So maybe this is a bit of a personal question, but I'm assuming that you would like have your brain preserved using the process where it gets fixated first. What was it called?
The aldehyde-stabilized cryopreservation.
Yeah, I'm assuming you'd prefer to have your brain preserved using that method, right?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I think that what we need is a technique that's been validated to preserve the connectome. And in lieu of that validation, it's really sort of a crapshoot as to what you're going to use to preserve yourself. The aldehyde-stabilized cryopreservation technique, I think, would have very serious problems being applied to someone post-mortem more than a couple of hours. And, that is the one thing that the current cryopreservation techniques probably have over it, is that you can still kind of use them even like 5 hours afterwards. On the other hand, those have not been demonstrated to preserve the connectome. So, what are the metrics of success that you want to use to judge your brain preservation protocol, or to say that, this preservation protocol is better than this other preservation protocol? What Hayworth did for the Brain Preservation Prize is he said, the first metric of success ought to be the ability to preserve the connectome. So for every synapse in the brain, can you trace that synapse back to an originating neuron, or can you not trace that? Because what neuroscience tells us is that memories are stored in the connectome, and so if you're disrupting the connectome to the point where it's not recognizable or it's not traceable, then it's likely you're not preserving memory. Now, maybe there's some other redundant mechanism that's encoding memories, but it does seem like the connectome is a good place to start. And so under that metric, there is no human brain preservation technique currently in existence that has been proven to preserve a connectome.
So why, first of all, doesn't it work more than a couple hours after death?
Well, because fixatives are being delivered through perfusion, and if you are trying to do this a couple hours after death, you're going to have a lot of problem with blood coagulation. And the process of fixation makes that much worse, and so you're going to have emboli, blockages in the bloodstream that are going to cause a lot of trouble with perfusion. With the cryoprotectant perfusion, although that's still very difficult to use after death, at least the cryoprotectants don't actively coagulate blood. In fact, they sort of do the opposite. They will help to expand your blood vessels and to shrink your red blood cells to get things flowing again. And so, I definitely think that as far as it goes, it's easier to establish flow with the current techniques than it would be with aldehyde-stabilized cryopreservation.
So 2 follow-up questions then. The first one being that if you were to die in ideal conditions, like at a hospital where you can unplug and know the time of death, would you prefer the cryoprotectant or the fixative method?
Right now it seems like it might be a better option. On the other hand, I really think that anything that's going to be used on a human's got to be validated to preserve the connectome.
But the cryoprotectant method isn't validated either, right?
Well, I think they should also be validated. It's kind of surprising to me that it hasn't been done because there are people who donate their bodies to science all day long, okay? And you could certainly have someone who has no expectation of future revival, and you have no fiduciary duty to preserve their brain, but nevertheless they want to donate their body to advance science, and you would pay to acquire their body post-mortem under similar conditions as a normal Alcor patient, and you do your preservation technique, and then you slice their brain into a million slices and check very carefully at many different points to see how well you did at preserving the brain. And I don't see why Alcor doesn't do that.
Does Alcor have the budget to do that sort of thing? Because I don't think they're running on a large margin.
Well, that's a personal problem now, isn't it? And nevertheless, that's the type of thing I would expect from a robust, well-validated brain preservation technology. And really, I would say Hayworth would agree, or definitely say that would be almost a requirement before you were to use this on people, right?
Yeah.
Would it be reasonable to extrapolate from, say, I guess, doing standard cryopreservation on a small mammal like a rat or a rabbit or something, and then looking at the connectome that way?
Well, yeah, you could do that, but even those studies aren't that conclusive, right? I mean, there's never been using just cryoprotectants images that demonstrate good connectome preservation.
That seems like such a huge example of civilizational inadequacy to me, or maybe not the entire civilization, but at least our subculture part of the civilization. Like, no one has gone and founded some sort of startup to try to find funding for these things and address these concerns.
Well, fortunately, we have a startup that's addressing these concerns at this very moment. And I have, in the last couple of months, managed to raise quite a bit of funding for this. I actually just closed, this is Nectome.
Okay.
So, I just closed a pretty large funding round for Nectome. So Nectome recently got into Y Combinator.
Congrats.
And we're in the winter 2018 batch, and we're going to be working on developing a validated brain preservation protocol, and we're working to preserve the first human connectome.
Holy shit! This is you are the answer to my prayers.
Well, we will see. I'm going to give it a good shot to try, and I think there's a good chance to reboot some of the discussions that are being had around preservation, more around neuroscience rather than around cryobiology. And, towards that end, we're working on actually preserving human connectomes in a research context, which I have definite plans to do. Hopefully within the next 3 months, we'll have the first human connectome preserved, but we'll see.
I just want to clarify that my prayers are a very low bar. All I want is for someone to be putting some money into looking into this thing. So that is what I mean when I say you are the answer to my prayers. That not that I expect you to actually preserve my brain or anything right now, but just that someone is finally looking into actually doing this.
It's interesting, the aldehyde-stabilized cryopreservation actually appeared in a book 30 years ago, Engines of Creation by Drexler. And almost in exactly the way that it's done today. Glutaraldehyde for an initial stabilization, ethylene glycol for cryoprotection. Yeah, there's a couple of minor issues when you actually try to do it that you run into, but nothing too huge. That works amazingly well at preserving the connectome. Of course, that's at the expense of totally abolishing all biological activity. Because the glutaraldehyde is basically gluing all the proteins together. But on the other hand, you're preserving that structure, which is thought by neuroscience to encode memories and personality. So to me, it makes sense as a trade-off. And, I think that the next thing that makes sense is kind of twofold. You've got this approach towards making this actually scale up to humans and be a very robust procedure that's actually available, and two is really demonstrating memory preservation, right? I've demonstrated I can preserve the connectome, but what we all really care about is, can we preserve memory? And so I think there's some profitable experiments that could be done today that help us answer these questions for memory preservation, and I think we ought to be doing both.
I think that's really awesome. I mean, it's going to be super reassuring to be able to put good estimates of cryopreservation working into double digits. Yeah, I'm with Enosh. This is the kind of thing that, I was talking with my girlfriend earlier today that, that the realization that we all had at some point growing up that like nobody really knows what they're doing and adults are all just fucking around. That there's no such thing as like, well-rounded understanding all the picture, I guess, smart controllers, like your doctors leave the room after you talk to them so they can go Google your symptoms, that kind of thing. And I'd even said I'm still kind of letting that percolate into the rest of my beliefs about everything. And yet I realized at the beginning of this conversation that I didn't really do that when signing up for cryopreservation. Like I just kind of assumed, okay, well, I guess in their defense and my defense, they were probably doing the best that they could, right?
They weren't trying, right? You want to do something that works.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. Like they weren't trying to do better than what they could do, but they were doing what they could. So there's at least that. But yeah, I'm all in favor of this getting leveled up considerably.
I'm probably the most pessimistic cryonicist that still actually bothered to sign up. I mean, I did sign up for cryonics, but when I did that, I thought it was about a 1% chance of working, even if done under ideal conditions. And that was barely worth it, honestly, for me to actually sign up. And, since then, I've even adjusted that a bit more downwards, just given that people die in very inconvenient ways. Which degrades it even further. So practically, I think it's like more of a 0.1% chance, which it's better than your other options, but it's still not a very good option. And why not put some serious resources into making that more like 90%, right? At which point, I think a lot more people are going to see the benefit for preservation, and it's less of a long shot and more of a thing that is risky, but you can bank on it. If it was more likely that this could work than, for example, an experimental cancer drug, right? I think you're going to see a lot of people wanting to be preserved and seeing the value in it.
Oh, Stephen, did you realize that we have assisted suicide laws here in Colorado?
No. Did that go through? Huh.
Yeah, I was just hearing on the radio about a study they did about the people in Colorado who chose to go through with the assisted suicide. So here we will be able to choose the time and location of our death if we know we're close to it. And therefore, it'll be under ideal conditions, hopefully.
Yeah, I do think that if you want to do serious brain preservation, it's got to be an end-of-life type of option. And it's got to be scheduled, just like any other major medical intervention is generally scheduled. You don't have a doctor that says, well, I'll do a quadruple bypass on you, but, let's wait till after you die, and then let's try to get you real fast and, and deal with it at that point. Normally, you're going to come into the doctor's office and get your surgery done.
And maybe not necessarily after you die, but we're going to wait until you have a heart attack on the street and then rush you into the hospital real quick and do the surgery then.
And, there's a place for emergency brain preservation as a service, and I think that's a worthwhile thing to be researching, but it's not clear to me why that needs to be the first step towards getting brain preservation available to people. I think that's what you have when it's a mature science,
Yeah, that should be a last-ditch effort just in case you didn't die in a nice, controlled fashion, the way that we would prefer.
So what does a serious brain preservation project look like, right? I mean, you've got independent validation of the technique, okay? And so the technique should be done on animals first and demonstrate that it can preserve connectome. And you need some consensus amongst, the people who ought to know, which is, connectomicists, neuroscientists in general, people who are involved in kind of doing simulations of neural tissue right now, that here are the things that you need to do to preserve memory, or at least here are the things you need to do to be likely to preserve memory, right? And then the technique itself should then be validated, after having been validated on animals, it should be validated on donated human bodies, right? So that you can work out what the limits are for being able to preserve a human brain. How many minutes after death can you succeed? What are the pitfalls to procedure? Get a really good risk profile. Preferably you've done this on 20 or 50 donated humans, right? And then at that point, it may make sense to have a preservation that's offered strictly at like a single location and using end-of-life kind of criteria for individuals. And then each individual would be individually validated for preservation, probably through a brain biopsy or another appropriate surrogate, and then independently confirmed, sort of like the Brain Preservation Prize. It was independently confirmed for these animal preservations that the connectome is actually preserved. And then there ought to be consequences for not preserving the connectome, right? If you say to someone, what we're selling you is connectome preservation, right? And then you fail to meet that level of standard, it's actually a good thing from a business perspective that there'll be financial consequences for that, as opposed to that it's just at a best efforts level of service, because then, the incentives to improve it are not necessarily there.
Right. So do you already have the funding for these first stages?
But we do. And I don't want to go into too much details on the funding right now for the company, but suffice it to say, we've actually managed to raise some appreciable amount of money, even since last time we talked. And the plan right now is that we will preserve a human connectome before the end of Y Combinator. And so our plans are in motion to do this.
Man, that's awesome. I'm just kind of absorbing that fact. That's really, really cool, to put it very mildly.
I was hoping to get the money raised, before the start of January, and we managed to do that at this point. So we're ready to rock and roll.
Fucking awesome. How long will this take you, do you think?
Super optimistically, we do it January.
Wait, what? In 1 month?
Yeah, I'm hoping to do it next month. More realistically, I could see it going into February, and then demo day is March. So I've got a pretty tight schedule here.
Yeah.
And then the still is 1 or 2 human brains that will have been preserved, and then we'll independently evaluate their preservation through groups like at Princeton, at the BPF, at MIT, that sort of thing.
And I'm assuming that the ultimate goal is to have a proven and reliable cryonic service to provide to customers once this is all over with?
It's something I think that there's a place for a service like that, and it's something that we're looking at. But I think that what's really important right now is to determine, whether you can preserve a human connectome. There's a lot of questions about that still, even with the animal work. I got the small mammal prize. I don't have the large mammal prize yet.
Yeah.
And so, it really needs to be validated on humans before you start talking about, whether you could use it on humans. But I do hope to have the answers to those questions answered, sooner rather than later, because I do think it's a very important option. And, looking into the further future, like 10 years from now, I really think that this ought to be considered a basic human right, that if you want to be able to be preserved, then you should be able to do that, right?
I think that I love the idea, but that sounds optimistic to me. It's not even it's debatable whether it's a human right to receive medical care in general in some parts of the world, including the United States, right? But I certainly like the idea. I had a quick question. Was there any major anticipated hurdles between a small animal and a human-sized brain, other than the size scaling up? Or is that in itself a much bigger hurdle than I'm guessing?
I don't think so, but devil's in the details for all of this stuff. To give you an idea, it took me 7 months to get it to work on rabbits, to perfect the chemistry and the, building the machines and such, and then to scale that about tenfold to a pig brain. Rabbit brain is about 12 grams, and a pig brain is 60 to 80 grams, so it's about 10 times bigger or so. To design and build that machine took me 5 hours. It took me 1 evening, and it worked the first time. So I do hope that we can do another factor of 10 and make this work for human brains. And I do think that one very important area of research that's been neglected for far too long is what is the actual time course over which the human connectome degrades? Nobody knows, believe it or not. Whether the connectome starts degrading 30 minutes after death, an hour after death, 2 hours after death, etc. There are certainly complications that arise when you're trying to do post-mortem brain preservation, which is how our initial trial is going to go, that we're doing, fairly soon. And so I could see that throwing a wrench into the works. But we will see. We will definitely see. I think that overall it shouldn't be too challenging, but the world has a way of making things much more difficult for you.
Yeah. Is there, in the ultimate goal of the project, are you looking just to do the scientific research on this sort of thing? Or are you looking to maybe one day be one of the early founders of this sort of service and maybe also push on like the political front to make this be considered a basic human right?
There needs to be a foundation that deals with lobbying for the rights of digital persons and persons that have been restored. There definitely needs to be work done on outreach to explain why preserving yourself makes sense at both an individual level and at a cultural level. I see this as being something that's important for preserving the memory of humanity, because every generation, we kind of lose the knowledge and the wisdom that was gained from a lifetime of existing, all right?
Yeah, we're just fucking treading water, repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
Well, and I think we keep doing that because we keep forgetting a lot of the lessons that we learn.
Yeah, as we lose the people who learned them.
Well, and it sucks, though, because we get more powerful every generation from technology, which does accumulate, but we don't get more wise every generation, and that is not good for the future. We really need to deal with this, and, there are people that are alive today where, there's only maybe 12 people that speak various languages, okay? And when they die, we lose that connection to our past. And that's a real shame. It would be much better if we could preserve that connection to our past. This is a very important. This is very important from a cultural level and from an individual level. How great would it be to be able to talk to your great grandmother, right? And you can't do that, but we may be in a position in the very near future to be able to offer that to future generations. So. It's very important. Somebody needs to be able to tell that story, and we are definitely looking at what people want in preservation right now, and I think you got to be very careful though about getting the science right and getting the preservation quality right, and being able to clearly convey what you can and can't do. Right, even a perfect implementation of aldehyde-stabilized cryopreservation for human brains is not going to be able to guarantee that it can preserve memory, all right? It's going to be able to guarantee it can preserve your connectome, all right? And there is still a debate as to whether that preserves memory, although I would say that a lot of the core understanding of neuroscience is that it ought to preserve memory. So that's where we're at right now. So in addition to, getting this to work for humans, I think there's got to be some serious research into proving or disproving this idea of memory preservation, because it's not going to do anybody any good if it doesn't actually preserve memories.
Right.
And I'm involved in all those things.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Because it would be really sad if someone went and did all this research and did the science, and then no one took it and ran with it and provided it as an actual service. And I do understand that some people just want to do the science, and that's what they have a passion for, and they don't want to go about trying to start a new business. If you are willing to take up that mantle, that makes me much more hopeful for the future.
Well, I didn't get into this business to not help people, right? So it would make me very sad too if you just had the research done and it didn't end up actually doing anything worthwhile.
Well, you can always hope someone else takes it over. I believe that a lot of people in the sciences do that sort of thing where they're like, hey, here's the research I did and the things I found. Now, someone please take this and make it available and do cool stuff with it.
I don't think that really ever works. So you gotta actually make it work yourself if you want your technology to win.
Fucking heroic responsibility mindset right there.
But it was because, Robert Ettinger wrote The Prospect of Immortality in the 50s, okay? And he was like, what if we freeze people and like maybe that'll preserve them? Look at the massive advances that have been made in cryobiology over the last couple of years. We're probably like 10 years out from reversible cryopreservation and probably the ability to undo whatever freezing damage we're doing now. And he thought that was such a compelling idea that he just had to publish it, and there would be massive worldwide government programs in 5 years to offer this to anybody who wanted it. And the reality is nothing happened at all. And 5 years later, he finally decided, well, let's try to start something to make it happen. And I think that's a much more realistic way that technology happens. And really, if your thing is legit, why would you not go and make a lot of money off of it, right? Why do you want someone else to do that?
That's a good point.
And if you're not willing to do that, maybe that means your thing's not legit after all.
Yeah, I think it also takes a lot of business acumen to make something like that work, because I personally would not want to start a business, because God, the headache.
I'd be looking for the easy halfway point where I could just be like, hey, Alcor, hey, Cryonics Institute, I found this other cool way to do it. Do you guys want to offer this as an option to your new customers?
Maybe they'd be pressured into that if they had a competitor that was offering that.
Right, yeah. I think that'd be cool too, because they already are working on sort of the campaign stuff, so...
A lot of people are very hesitant about using a preservation technique like this because you are, totally abolishing biological activity. And the most realistic mechanism, I can personally see for extracting memories from a preserved brain would be destructive scanning and emulation in a kind of simulation environment, right, on a computer. And a lot of people don't like the idea of that, or they feel like that's not really a meaningful continuation of them. And so for that reason, I think a lot of people are not necessarily going to want to go for something like aldehyde-stabilized cryopreservation.
Yeah, but if you're restored in a simulation, you can always have that simulation hooked up to a cool cyborg body and interact with the real world too.
Well, you absolutely could. Or you could print a new brain, that's patterned off the blueprint of the old brain and do that. And of course, I say that kind of flippantly. I mean, that's an amazingly advanced application of technology. On the other hand, I could see a pathway towards doing many of these things, but I don't see a pathway if you don't have that blueprint. If you have that data that defines what your memories are, going to be very difficult. The comparison here would be like, let's say you have a book and you want to preserve that book, right? And so, one of your options is you mix up a bunch of epoxy and you're going to pour it over that book, and the whole thing's going to turn to a solid block of plastic, and you're going to glue the ink to the pages and the pages to themselves, and you have this totally immobilized cube of just plastic, right? On the other hand, you can preserve the book by just sort of putting it in a nice environment, right?
Like a freezer.
Yeah, and you're going to end up getting some holes in the pages, though, from, just decay, and the ink's going to fade a bit. But you'll still be able to open that book, right, and look at some of the pages, which are going to be very fragile. I would say that the bigger those lacunas in that page become, right, these holes in the text, it rapidly goes from, maybe we can figure out what this letter was, or maybe we can figure out what this word is, to you'll never be able to figure out what that sentence is, right, or what that paragraph is. You've really lost the information. And, while it seems at the face of it that this block of plastic is almost impossible to interrogate or do anything with, you could certainly imagine going through it with an X-ray and then printing a new copy of that book, and now you can completely read that story again. If I told you, hey, we can give you, or you have two options. I can give you the original Library of Alexandria on a thumb drive, okay? Or we'll give you the ruins of the Library of Alexandria, but, only a quarter of the books are intact at all, and even those are highly damaged. But they're the original books. Which one would you guys rather have?
Sounds like a no-brainer.
Yeah, well, from a practical point of view, I might take the originals because I think those would be worth a lot more on the market, and I think that possibly all the knowledge that was in there originally has been recreated over the millennia and, likely surpassed. But I absolutely take your point.
I would definitely go for the thumb drive.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That was my first impulse, is you could sell the real books for something, but, for the spirit of the question.
Yeah, to address the spirit of your question, I would actually prefer to have all the information on a thumb drive rather than only pieces of the information in their original form.
And I would say that, it's interesting because the story is what matters. And the originals, you can ascribe a lot of value to them, but what we really care about is hearing the voices of the past. And
That's true.
the originals aren't good at giving us those voices of the past, but the thumb drive is.
Yeah, and we could recreate some of the original lost works of fiction and dramas and such that are just completely lost if we had them on thumb drive.
I wish the Greeks had, they had this concept of a libation to the gods, where if you have a drink, you're going to pour out part of that drink on the ground, for the gods. I wish they had the same thing for libraries, right, where they take their books and they're going to, pour wax on them and turn them into a block of wax and put them in a lead box and toss the lead box into the sea, okay? Because if they had done that, we would have their stories again today.
Yeah.
It's just a shame that they didn't.
Yep. Wow, so that is a lot. Do you have like a timeline now for the broader picture, broader strokes of things going forward into the future after this first step here?
I think that there's two main things. We need to get this to work for humans because it would be good to solve all the logistical problems around human connectome preservation. And then beyond that, there's this big important question of, does preserving the connectome preserve memories? And if not, what additional structures in the brain do you need to preserve memories for future digital emulation? And so attacking both problems, I think, makes a lot of sense. One is more of a pure research question. One's more of a pure engineering question. So I intend to do both. The human preservation is substantially easier given our current resources. So we're going to work on that and demonstrate, kind of a next phase of this brain preservation prize, demonstrating a preservation of a human connectome. And then there's a couple of very interesting experiments for memory preservation that I think are just around the horizon. And those are approaching memory preservation as kind of like a zero knowledge proof, where you do an experiment that's designed to reveal whether the memories exist or not, because you wouldn't be able to complete the experimental outcome without those memories existing. And it gets around some of these problems of understanding exactly how memories are encoded, or even being able to trace large amounts of brain tissue, neither of which we can do currently. And so I think those are amazing experiments. And then also, growing a brain on a chip, as we're rapidly developing these technologies. I know there's one company that's developing this technology, so you could have drones that can smell things. And that's really cool. And it seems to, they're doing some major progress for it. We're actually growing real cortical neurons on a chip, and there's actually electrical probes in the neuron cell bodies, that are getting sub-millivolt signaling from these neurons, and then the neurons are kind of exposed to the air, so various things impinge on them and cause them to fire in different ways. And it's actually, learning from that neural network that forms what the smells are. But you could, after many days of recording carefully from this neural network, then preserve that network with your preservation technique, scan it with an electron microscope, and if just from the data from the electron microscope you can emulate it and totally recreate the input-output, the transfer function of that neural network, that's very compelling that your preservation technique is preserving the things you need to replicate computation. The zero knowledge proofs are cool because you're able to answer high-level questions like, was this mouse afraid of this thing or this other thing? And so those types of experiments are doable with today's technology, and they're important. They actually get you answers to questions about memory preservation, and they allow you to compare one preservation technique against another one. So those are the two things I think are going to be really cool in the future. I should probably get going because both of my computers are about to die, and I would love to be able to get you your audio. But did you have anything to wrap it up?
Man, I was going to dive into more of the memory stuff, but we'll have to save that for another time. Yeah, I think you're right. It's worth preserving the memory of this conversation on your computer rather than losing it forever. So
I had some more too, but we can hit them up next time. I was wondering if once this next phase of your project is done and you get some results, would you be willing to come back to the show and talk about them some more?
Absolutely, but you got to show off some of the electron micrographs if I do that.
Yeah, no problem. We can put them up on the website.
Deal.
Beautiful. All right, cool. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I will let you go.
All right, thanks. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot, Robert. That's great.
Alrighty, so thank you everybody for listening, and well, I hope you had a great Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Excellent.
Goodbye, everybody.
All right, see ya.